Hey, everybody, it's Matt Gurney. This is the latest episode of On the Line's new long form interview based podcast. Interesting conversation this week. Daniel Debow is my guest. He's going to give you his own background at the start of the podcast. He'll tell you who he is and where he's from. For our purposes today, it's more important to know what he is. He is a long serving Canadian tech entrepreneur. And right now, he is a volunteer at a group calling itself Build Canada. They're coming up with rapid, often tech focused, but not always tech focused solutions on building out the economy of this country. We're under threat. The world is changing. We're being tariffed. Build Canada wants to know how quickly we can get this country on a growth trajectory. He tells me about where he came from, where the idea for Build Canada came from, the kind of projects they're working with, the role of politics in the tech sector generally. Is there such a thing as a tech bro? And also the hate mail he's been getting. That is next on the latest episode of On the Line. This message is brought to you by the Motion Picture Association of Canada. For decades, Ottawa controlled what is Canadian and what isn't when it comes to series and movies available to Canadians. The rules are out of date and costing Canadians opportunities. It's time for Ottawa to focus on helping Canadian film and TV workers and encourage efforts to showcase Canada. More opportunities for Canadians, more common sense. Your choice, not Ottawa's. Learn more at mpa-canada.org. So, we have a lot to talk about, Daniel, but I want to start with a really basic question, and it's purely to set this up a little bit for the listeners and the viewers. Tell me about you. Like, just tell me what your career path is. And we're going to tell you about what you're doing now in a minute, but kind of what's the concise life story that brought you from birth to sitting down to have a conversation with me today?
Just all of it.
Yeah.
Concise.
As
Um,
concise as possible,
no
30 or
problem.
40 seconds.
No problem. I've been lucky. Canada has been very lucky. Greatest decision I ever made as a business person was who my parents would be. But that luck has translated into a great career. So here's what I did. I'm from Toronto. Went to Western. I worked as a consultant in the States. I did a law degree and an MBA at the same time at University of Toronto. And got saved from going into kind of corporate law or investment banking by a guy named David Ossip, who's a great Canadian entrepreneur. He's now the CEO of Dayforce. But he started a company called WorkBrain with another friend, David Stein, two Davids. And they convinced me to come join with them. And so I was on the founding team of this company. We grew it to a public company and eventually got sold to an American company. And then David Stein and I started another one called Ripple. We grew that and we built it and sold it to Salesforce. So the American company, I was an executive there for a few years. Then I started another company called Helpful with a guy named Farhan Thawar, and we built that and grew it and sold it to Shopify, where I was an executive for 6 years doing product, corporate development, partnerships. And so that's kind of like been the straight linear line of my business career. I've done a bunch of other things, so I'll just kind of quickly go through them. Um, I started or helped to start this program called the Creative Destruction Lab at the University of Toronto. It's now grown all over the world, actually, and all over Canada, with a guy named Ajay Agarwal. I was a very active, still am one of the most active early stage investors in the country. So companies like Wealthsimple or Clio or Skip the Dishes or Ada. I was an early stage investor, layer 6 in companies like that. I also have, as you can tell, a real passion for music. So have started a not-for-profit called Bonfire Arts, and what we do is we create musical spaces. So we've got a couple of amazing places, one up in the Kawarthas and one in Toronto, where we give artists a chance to go and play. Some of the greatest bands in Canada have played at our places. It's really awesome, from the Arkells or Reclaws to Broken Social Scene. And then through that, built a real estate company with some other partners, which is focused on creative real estate development and local housing. So last thing is two other things that are probably relevant. I'm on the board of a company called Loblaw, which many people have heard of. It's a very large organization. Learn a lot about how big organizations work. And then for 8 years, with a fellow named Ben Allery, I taught a course at the University of Toronto Law School on public policy, essentially public policy as it relates to exponential technologies. And The thesis was, hey, we're about to get hit by all of these things, whether it's pandemics or AI, and the way that we run our country, the way that we run the world is not ready for the rate of change that's about to happen. So we ran this course. Okay, that's kind of
That's
my
not
quick,
bad.
concise answer.
Yeah, I think you need a few more interests. I'd like you to branch out a bit further. I think you could do better. So, Daniel, the reason you and I are talking today is because we have a mutual friend, and a couple weeks ago, our mutual friend had told me that you and some colleagues were sitting down to brainstorm some ways of I guess we'd call it battle proofing Canada or hardening Canada, or as you guys have settled on calling it, building Canada, because you're the group you're working with now is called Build Canada. And I'm going to let you do most of the talking here. But the reason I found this so interesting is because you and I had spoken a couple weeks ago when you were just getting this going. One of the things that you had said to me on the phone when we spoke originally was that it was you and some friends and colleagues who were brainstorming ideas in a group chat. And that made me just laugh because in my industry, my field, we're doing the same thing. And I called up some other friends and colleagues in different fields and I said, "What's going on in your group chats lately?" And some of these guys are military, some of them are law enforcement, some of them are public service in a very general sense. And they say their group chats are just buzzing with like throwing spaghetti at the wall. What are things that we can do here? So I think we're going to talk a little bit about why Canadian National Salvation is apparently a group chat thing. But let's actually talk a little bit about Build Canada. With you don't have to name names or anything, but how did it all start? Because you guys now have a website, you're releasing policy positions. Where did it start? And I just don't mean like who came up with the idea. I mean, what do you think almost the spiritual genesis of it was? Why were all you guys in a group chat talking about this sort of thing?
Yeah, great question. Well, look, I completely resonate. I think half the country is in a group chat right now with their friends in their community saying, "What the hell is going on? Why can't we do X? Why don't we do Y?" And it wasn't one group chat for me; it was multiple. I have lots of different interests, as you can tell, and the theme, but maybe different prescriptions for how to fix it. But whether it's musicians or business people or early stage entrepreneurs or old friends of mine and who are teachers and lawyers, just universally like, hey, we can do so much better. And so that was the theme. And in terms of like, I'd say the entrepreneurial technology folks and builder types who maybe were in one set of group chats that I was part of, I think that this has been a decades long thing saying, hey, we build things. We like to build companies. We see problems, we go fix them, right? And I think many of those folks, it's not like they just showed up to the public policy party or just showed up to help. As I mentioned, I helped to start this program at CDL, taught a class for a while. Many of the other folks who are involved have been engaged citizens. They're involved. They care about the country, and I think uh, that's a really important point. Like, these are not sort of random drive-by people. They care. They're volunteers. They're working on boards. They start organizations. And so um, that's kind of the background context. I think you've got a bunch of folks who are active doers and heard this sort of, we're talking in advance. I think it was the GDP per capita information was really shocking for people. Just like, wow. And what a stark moment that it started to diverge. Obviously saw what was happening in the States, recognizing the world is changing. And so over the Christmas break was in a bunch of these chats, and I turned to my wife and was thinking of leaving my job, and I'm like, I've got some time coming up, but this is all cathartic and all, like yelling into the chat room, right, rather than yelling into your pillow and yelling to somebody else says, I know, I agree, but nothing happens if you just leave it at that. And so the question was, what could I do? What could I get some folks together to help? And it wasn't just me. There were other people independently at the same time feeling the same urge of like they want to do something. And so a lot of this was just putting up a little flashlight, a little beacon and saying, hey, here's one project. And so a bunch of people kind of came quickly to do the work, not just show up, but to do the work that's required. And so that's kind of the genesis of Build Canada. I should tell you what it is, I suppose. It's probably useful.
Yeah,
So
please. Yeah.
there's a specific thing, which is I saw a lot of people who had what I thought very specific insight about different parts of our economy. If you're a health tech entrepreneur, you understand healthcare. If you're a immigration tech software person, you start to understand the system. You understand how it works, good and bad. Same with education tech. And I think, sort of a bit of a tangent, like the thinking is like, well, there's a tech world and then everybody else. It's like, no, tech is everywhere, and they're inside of all the parts of how we run our economy, how we run our country. And so these people had lots of insights, but what they don't have is time, right? So what would get is a tweet or X or whatever you call them now, post, and then into the chat room, maybe phone calls, maybe if people felt really motivated, an op-ed. Okay, I'm going to write 400 or 500 words at the level that you can read in a newspaper, which is not that detailed. So for whatever reasons, because of the other things I'm involved with, I ended up interacting with a bunch of policy folks and politico types, and they would kind of tell me, they're like, that stuff is nice, but it's kind of useless. Like, we meet you guys, meaning business people, we meet you at these events and these dinners, and you give us these great hand wavy ideas, but what do you think we're supposed to do with that? Like, we have to go turn that into something real. And today, the mechanism generally, and this is not my field, is either you get a lobby group who has a specific interest in advancing a specific policy for that group. Nothing wrong with that, but that's what it is. You have like a think tank who sort of has an ideological point of view, and they'll take a while to put out a paper and they'll get it out there. It'll be very well done. And then you might have the public policy apparatus, which are either political appointees or civil service appointees inside the government. And so they'll respond to a minister who says, I had this idea, why don't you do it? It just might take 6-12 months, a long time to get that back. And so what we realized is, like, we could probably shortcut that. Oh, power all just went out in my house. Let's hopefully see if it goes back on again. Okay. Moved into a new house. So,
They're trying to silence you.
Yes, that's right. So the idea was, well, wait, could we make that go faster? And so putting the flashlight up, got a bunch of volunteers who were both people who had a passion for public policy and the country. They cared about it, and had product experience. They had built technology products, and people who actually knew how to write public policy. They had either worked for the government or either worked for this government or for another government, had worked in the civil service. And they were also attracted to this idea of, like, hey, why don't we give voice in a specific, actionable, and detailed way to these ideas? That's what Build Canada does. It's a website and a bunch of volunteers who talk to entrepreneurs who say, hey, I have an idea about housing. I have an idea about civil service. I have an idea about healthcare. We talk to them, and then we use technology, basically a series of LLMs that we've kind of tuned to help write policy memos, to do research, to do writing. And then we have a review process where people who've actually done the work, who write these things, read them over, say, yeah, that makes sense. It's as good as what you're going to get. And then we publish them. That's what Build Canada is. I'll stop there because I'm sure you have some follow-up questions, but that's the genesis. That's what we've been doing.
Yeah, I want to, in a couple minutes, I want to come around and actually talk a little bit about some of the specific things you guys are proposing, but I want to make more comment than a question. But it's fascinating for me to hear you describe this, right? Because you put your finger on a couple of minutes ago something that I think is bang on, and I want to underline it. There is an enormous amount of expertise in Canadian society, academic expertise, lived experience, business leadership, just all the fields of human endeavor. But what there doesn't seem to be in Canada is much of a mechanism for governments to import that. And every once in a while, the government will be like, well, what do you mean? We have a retired general as our defense minister, or our health minister is a doctor. So, like, we have these little symbolic things. But in the United States, and I'm not an expert in every country in the world. You mentioned like lobby groups. Canadians are good at lobby groups. A lot of industry associations exist. A lot of lobby groups exist. There's an entire economic ecosystem that is basically public relations and government relations. So Canadians are good at that. One of the weird missing pieces in Canada is think tanks. And we have some, and I know all of them because there's not that many of them. But you go to the United States, Washington, D.C. is just a checkerboard of different think tanks from every ideological perspective, every public policy area. They've got think tanks that are constantly churning out position papers. Canada doesn't really have that. And something the Americans are actually better at than we are is either through presidential campaigns or Congress, is they grab on these ideas and they pull them into the political conversation. In Canada, in a large part, private sector expertise and public sector expertise are like walled off from each other. and they're each kind of doing their own thing. I cannot tell you, Daniel, and I'll ask you a question in a minute. Don't worry, I'll stop pontificating.
Go
But
ahead. I'm loving it.
cannot I cannot tell you how many times I've had this experience where a guy like you, someone with actionable business experience, proven track record of success in any given field, will come to me and be like, "Do you know anyone in the government?" And I just kind of laugh and I'm like, "Yeah, I know one or two." And they're like, "Because I've run into this really stupid problem and we could fix it. It's like this piece of legislation is written badly, or this regulation is hurting not just me, but my entire industry. And we could fix it by adding 2 words or subtracting 2 words, right?" And no one knows how to do it. No one knows how to approach the government. No one in government is tasked with being the interface between government and the rest of society. A couple of months, like, well, I guess it was longer than that. It was last summer. A good friend of mine, the government had changed regulations and it was blowing up his business. Like, and it was completely unintended. It wasn't government malfeasance. They had made a change. There'd been an unintended consequence, and it was causing chaos. And because it was a seasonal industry, they didn't have a year to fix it. They had 3 weeks to fix it, and they never did. And they ended up losing a ton of money, and it was right across his whole industry because no one in government, there was not the ability to interface the people in the real world with the people in the government who could have fixed the problem. So when I asked you a few minutes ago about like why is so much of Canadian civil society functioning in group chats, it's because I think there's nowhere else to put it. All this energy and expertise and ambition, unless you actually go out and build something like Build Canada, or you go and like a weirdo like I am and you create the line, all of the energy gets stuck in the group chats, which basically turn into like primal scream therapy, right? Where everybody's in there,
Exactly.
yeah, like to feel less crazy, to feel less alone. To me, it is astonishing how much ingenuity and human energy Canadians put into bypassing broken systems because we've largely given up on fixing them.
Wow. There's a lot to unpack in there. It made me think of Trudeau's, like the first Trudeau's comment about being an American and being Canadian next to America is like a mouse next to an elephant. No matter how friendly the elephant, you always feel it. Except now the elephant is clearly not friendly, but it's actually the mouse is the Canadians and the elephant is the government. Like it just rolls over and makes this change and your friend's business just goes kablooey. Like that happens. Um, yeah, I mean, you're first of all, a couple points. Not only does the sort of idea industrial complex, like these think tanks, which are viciously competing for ideas and policy, exist in DC, it exists at the state level too. There's probably way more think tanks just focused on California than there are in all of Canada, or in New York State or Illinois. Pick it. So yeah, that is an interesting observation. I don't know if I have the exact answer for why or how. I mean, um, I'm sure there's some reason I don't have my finger on it, but I do think it points to the thing that you sort of really ended up with, which is like, what's the vehicle to engage, right? And honestly, it's a little sad how many people have said, "Thank you so much for doing this." People I respect and know. I'm like, I'm setting up a website to do it. It's not like I'm going off to war, you know. Like I'm it's and but even that is seen as that's a big thing, and it is a shame. But I will say I don't think Canadians are like devoid of civil engagement. They just channel it in a different way for the most part. They're volunteering, they're doing little league, they're helping with their kids, they're helping their neighbors, they're finding some other club or program. But yeah, I agree. Getting involved politically is not super fun. Um, even this thing, which I hope is relatively benign and we'll go through it. Like the amount of hate mail is shocking, It's shocking. But I suppose it's par for the course. It's just I can see why people do not want to put themselves out in any way to try and do things. But that's a shame. Like we will be in big trouble if we have less of those ideas shared. Um, I think I want to harp on one thing, which is again the point, which is I do think when it comes to Canada has lots of problems, but one of the fundamental problems, whether you call it like competitiveness, productivity, innovation, like they're sort of related. They're all related, but growth. We've got to grow the economy, right? A world where we're at sub 2% growth is a not good world. You have social discord, homelessness, you have upset people. When you get to 3, 4% growth, that all changes. It's sort of, it's hard to remember like the difference between 2% growth and 3% growth is not 1%, it's 50%. and the growth difference between 2 and 4 is 100% different. And so the question then is growth, a big question. How do we grow the country? And now, by the way, one of our biggest strategies has gotten a lot more complicated, right? The Americans are definitely more complex than they used to be about how do we take advantage of our situation and grow with them. And the one thing I'd say about that expertise is that, like, maybe this overly simplistic, but growth is either the government hiring more people and spending on services, which we know, and it's not that sustainable. We know how to do that, but it just doesn't last forever. Or it is companies selling more goods and services to Canadians or ourselves or to the rest of the world, right? That's growth. Growth is selling revenue. Like, revenue comes from selling products and services. We never really want to talk about it that way. It seemed as this like abstract whole of society metric, and like there's all sorts of input. Like, there is, but you can also reduce it down to like our companies have to sell more stuff to Canadians and they have to sell it more to the world. Period. Full stop. And then if you do that and you understand that, you're like, oh, if only we had a group of people who spent their whole lives figuring out how to sell stuff to other people, goods and services, build things that sell. Those people are the business people. They have good ideas. They are engaged. They care about the country. If we say to ourselves as a country, you people are disqualified, you're just greedy, everything you're doing is for your own sake, we don't want to hear about it. I mean, I don't know how you square that. We have to grow, and we don't want to hear from the people who spend their whole time growing. It's like we have a heart surgery crisis in Canada, Matt. Let's convene all the custodians at the hospital, the administrators at the hospital. Let's get the nurses, very important, they do heart surgery. Let's get everybody, but let's not ask the heart surgeons because they're just going to want to do more heart surgery. Does that make sense to anybody? Like, no, you'd
No.
want to talk to the people who are like in there with their hands dirty. And that's really what Build Canada is trying to do, is just take them and say, okay, let's turn these into specific ideas and engage in a way, frankly, that is, I think, fair. It's on the internet. It's nonpartisan. Anybody can read these ideas and invite, frankly, opprobrium. If people hate it, they're not going to like some of these ideas. That's okay. I think um, another goal of what we're trying to do, and it's not sinister, is to shift the conversation. I think Canada, like we're literally. I tweeted this the other day. In early, sorry, in late December or December 2019. Remember, I taught this course for 8 years. We talked about exponential technologies. We did a class every year on pandemics and bioweapons because we saw that curve. And we knew, oh, it looks like this for a while. And then and we just kept telling the class, like, this thing's going to happen. You don't know when, but here's what you're going to look for. So in December 19, I'm running around telling my friends and family, hey, get ready, get stocked up, make sure there's food in the house. They thought I was totally nuts, totally crazy. People thought I was talking crazy talk. Now, my house was stocked up. We were ready to go. And my wife, who thought I was insane, was very thankful. In some strange way, I feel like the business people have been running around in like that pre-December 19 saying, hello, we are about to hit a massive economic COVID. We're going to get slapped with these tariffs. They are dramatically, forget about the tariffs. They're just changing the framework of how the world
Yeah.
economy is working. By the way, if it wasn't even the Americans, AI is coming, and that's a real thing. By the way, there's geopolitical conflict in the world. That's a real thing too. By the way, a lot of the people who were not affluent are becoming affluent. Actually, like, there's a lot more demand in the world. So all these things are changing really, really fast. And as Canadians, we're like, la, 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 like, let's not talk about it. We don't want to hear. And I feel like it's that time. And so I think part of what we're trying to do is engage with the government in a way, or engage with the people too, by saying, here are some bold ideas that we need to recognize. What got us here is not going to get us there. The way we ran this country, our conceptions of ourselves, our conceptions of the trade-offs and choices that society has made, I think those are gonna change. Okay, I feel like I'm ranting now too. I gotta
No.
stop.
I have a big question for you. Daniel Debow is my guest. He's a volunteer with Build Canada. We are going to take one quick break. We'll be back in a moment. This conversation continues. This message is brought to you by the Métis Nation of Ontario. Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, October 1993. Steve and Roddy Powley move through the brush. Their hunt is successful. They tag a moose with a Métis card and a handwritten note, harvesting my meat for winter. But a week later, the Powleys are charged. Since the late 1700s, generations of Métis from the upper Great Lakes to the Rocky Mountains have hunted to sustain their communities. The Powleys refuse to accept the government denying their rights. They fight in court on the strength of Métis history in the Upper Great Lakes, winning at every level, all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. In 2003, the ruling is unanimous. The Métis are a distinct Indigenous people with constitutionally protected rights. This decision paves the way for the recognition of Métis rights, from harvesting to self-government. Because Steve and Roddy Powley stood their ground and the Métis Nation stood with them, history was made. For more information, visit OntarioMétisFacts.com. Continuing conversation right now with my guest, Daniel Debow of Build Canada, and as he already said at the beginning, a bunch of other things. I think he needs more hobbies and interests. You said just a minute ago before we hit the break, you were talking about the COVID experience, and my COVID experience was very similar to yours. Like I came at it from a different angle than you, but I knew what that was. I knew what was coming, and I couldn't get people to believe me. And eventually I went, okay, well, I'm going shopping. And I've told the story before, Daniel, but I was pushing my cart very slowly through the store, and I was surrounded by other people doing their normal shopping, but one or two other people doing the same thing I was. And it was like we could spot each other. We were on the same frequency, and we kind of look, and I'd like give them a nod, and they'd give me a nod. I've been banging the drums for years. I wrote a column more than 3 years ago now where I said our expectations are a problem. Canada has gotten used to existing with certain political, economic, cultural, military assumptions that I think are changing, and Canadians don't want to talk about it. Oh, you now have this website. You guys have begun to publish memos, and I've been reading them. I'm not going to ask you to summarize all of them here because I know they each have an author, and I don't know if you endorse every one of them, blah, blah, blah. But in general terms, tell me about the kind of memos or papers you guys have been putting out so far. What are the issues that Build Canada has been identifying as being sort of ripe for change, improvement, evolution, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah. Well, first, let me get the comments you made because I think it's a really astute one. No, I do not necessarily endorse everything that comes out, nor does every person who's writing a policy in the same way that everyone on the line doesn't endorse every article that you publish. But what we're doing is giving them help to turn it into a place that's like, it's not an op-ed, but it's a policy memo. So yeah, some people, some entrepreneurs will have a bolder idea. That doesn't mean everybody agrees. Second point is we're not a lobby group. It's not like a Build Canada position. It is this person's position. We help them get it out there. But yes, of course, just like you do, you have to select editorially what goes out. So there is a theme. And I think to answer your question, the theme is unabashedly pro growth. Like, what do we need to grow? That is the fundamental question of the country. And again, pro growth means what do we do to sell more products and services to each other in the world? I just like keep saying that because people need to remember that's what we mean when we mean growth, other than spending money on government services, which we do a lot of. The other thing is, I'd say, bold. Not everybody agrees with these ideas. And in particular, because of exactly what you said, there's an assumption. This is the way we do things in Canada. These are the deals. This is the implicit deal. We even have a word for it in our constitutionalism called convention. This is the convention. This is what they get. This is what we get. You don't mess with that. We are definitely trying to poke people and say, well, the world is changing. Maybe those assumptions around how things always are have to change. And by at least putting it out, you're going to start talking about it. I think a third element of all of these policies are that they are subtractive, right? We're trying really hard to be like, we need to spend $6 billion on this new program or $2 billion on this. Really, it's actually saying like, what can you take away? What rules and regulation? What can you unburden the entrepreneurs of our country and the builders of our country so that they can get faster to selling more goods and services, which is what grows GDP. And then last one is like precision strikes. And so what does that mean? I think, let's like also transition to what you asked, which is like, what are the areas? Let's take healthcare, for example. So on our first wave, we had a healthcare memo from Mike Serbinis. Mike is one of the best entrepreneurs in the country. And for the past 10 years, he built Kobo. And before that, and for the past 10 years, he's been building League Health, which is a healthcare company. And so he knows a lot about the healthcare system and how it works. And he's a digital person. And so when we said healthcare, he came up, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. I said, whoa, let's pick one thing and we'll do another one later. And so his focus was on healthcare data portability and basically saying in English, hey, there's a standard for healthcare data that's basically emerged. while we've been debating and discussing in Canada, burning billions of dollars, the world has basically decided this thing, I think it's called the FIRE standard, is the standard. We should just get on board and stop debating and use it. It'll save us money, time, make people happier with their healthcare system. Won't be sending faxes everywhere. Why don't we get to that? And so that's what I mean by precision. That's and then we can write about that specific. And the critique people came back, oh, but you should do this to fix healthcare. You should do this. I know, but that's the op-edism of public policy. What you do need to do is be specific and detailed. So that's what we're trying to get to. So areas that we've done so far, we've had one on healthcare, one on immigration, one on heritage, actually. Like, how do we talk about the Canadian narrative? And how do we get those stories out there? We've done one on transportation, like next generation transportation regulation. We just launched one on interprovincial trade. I think this morning there's going to be one on public service reform and how the public service can work. There's going to be ones coming on housing, on energy. Also worth noting, we've kind of gone beyond tech entrepreneurs. I've got oil and gas people coming in saying, I want my voice heard. I've got housing entrepreneurs saying, like, I know how to help. We can help. And so that's pretty exciting. But those are the topics, right? I think the topics are ones that are around growth. They're ones that, like, we can figure out how we can get obstacles out of the way of our entrepreneurs. I'll pause. I'll let you get another question and keep going.
So you've done business on both sides of the border. You've talked a little bit about the work you've done in the United States. I haven't done a ton of business in the States, but I have done some business in the States. And one of the things, and you've touched on this and I've touched on this, but let's actually just drag it right out to the middle of the stage here and shine a light on it. I say this in a nonpartisan way. Canadians are incredibly conservative. And I don't mean that in the sense that we vote for the blue team, but we're change averse, we're hesitant. There's a great story I know from a Canadian entrepreneur based in Canada who had operations in Canada and the United States, and all one company, but different offices. And they were rolling out a new IT backend to make intra-office communications better. And the American companies were like, yes, let's do it. It's going to help. Canadian companies are like, that's going to be a hassle. It's going to be like, it's going to slow. Do we have to? Can we have 6 months? The Americans could not introduce it fast enough because they knew it was going to make them more productive. The Canadians viewed it as a drag. And I have seen versions of that about 1 billion times before, where Canadians don't want to change. We've talked about COVID. We've talked a little bit about the geopolitical struggles. We've talked about the fact that Americans, in their wisdom, I guess, have decided to change the rules of international trade. The countries that respond the fastest to that are going to have the advantage. I don't know why Canada, as in general, doesn't seem to see advantage in moving quickly. The Canadian response to everything is to convene a task force and give it a huge budget and an 18-month review mandate. You guys are moving fast. You used the term a minute ago, precision strike. When was the last time you heard any kind of Canadian official talk about a precision strike? How many regulations that are not actually meaningfully contributing to public health and safety, which is the platonic ideal of what these regulations before, how many could we just kind of get rid of without actually killing anybody and making it a little bit easier to do business here? And why would even suggesting that be so radical?
So, lots to unpack in that. One is, first of all, not only we are a conservative country, we self-select out the people. Remember, we've had mass immigration from Canada. At least 1 million people have left, and many of them are amazing entrepreneurs. And sadly, in the past little while, incredible entrepreneurs and certainly incredibly young people go to the United States. So, like, if you are a risk-taking person, you have this other option. Go to a place where, like, you feel more comfortable. That is just literally what I hear from folks. And candidly, sometimes Canadians look at me funny and they're like, "You sure you're Canadian?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm sure." But I feel like you don't get to define that for us, right? So I think it's true that that culture exists. I think that the way I think about it is that Canada is a place that, well, first of all, you have to accept, defined itself. Everyone jumped on the prime minister for saying we define ourselves as not being American, which was sort of sad and icky because how could you define yourself as not being something else? It turns out there's actually an anthropological concept called schismogenesis, which describes exactly that two neighboring tribes we're not like those guys. But in our case, it literally is our history, right? You got to remember, at least in the case of Upper Canada, the place was populated by people who were like, we don't want that idea. We're not with them. We're here. We like to
including my ancestors who
right,
left
right. So like they're
Pennsylvania and
like
came to on to like Upper
defi-
Canada.
right. So definitionally, they're like, whatever they are, we're not that. So I think there's some of that inside of it, inside the identity, which is pretty deep. But I think there's another part, and I would say it is that Canada has opted for, probably for good reasons, to nation build in that context, what I would call Laurentian stability over Schumpeterian dynamism. Okay, so Laurentian stability is, look, we really only need 6 banks. None of them will ever go out of business. Okay, and they're going to employ lots of people, maybe more than they actually need to employ, but it's going to create jobs, and that's stability. And we need it for our country. We need, one railway company. We need to restrict people from coming into airlines because there's always like, oh, who's going to fly all the way up north? That's our excuse. Same with telco, same with everything. And so, just to your point about the Americans are quicker to adopt things, I think we're missing something here. That desire for stability in our economy, in our rules, in what we do. And it's not necessarily about equality. It's just stability, which is a good thing. It helps you build a business, build a country, build when you know you can manage expectations. But that stability also makes you rigid because things aren't breaking all the time. You don't get used to a world where things change. And so you don't build what would be called resiliency, right? When you break an arm, the arm comes back usually stronger. So this concept of things breaking on a regular basis, getting used to that, if you have a completely stable economy, it's really hard to change that economy. There's another side effect. That stability tends to come at the suppression of competition. Not in massive ways, but a little way here, a little way there. Hey, you have to have this much ownership in this industry. Hey, you have to have this kind of director. Hey, you can't import this product into this jurisdiction. I mean, you just go down the list. There are hundreds of things. If you systematically add those up, they result in less competition. And the thing about our American friends is we often say, oh, they're risk takers and they innovate. Even the story you told, they like to innovate. They want to do stuff. I'm like, I kind of call bullshit on that. You know what they want is to not lose their jobs. They want to not have their customers taken away because somebody else comes up with a better product with better service. That is the driver of innovation. It's the competitive nature of a market economy where you're like, hey, if I don't get that. And by the way, it also includes their governments. I mean, they explicitly say there's a lab here, 50 states. If this state's better at attracting entrepreneurs and has better regulations, people should move. And so they've got this labor mobility thing happening that is much stronger. So look, I agree. The output that you're describing, that aversion to radical changes and like, let's have a precision strike. But I think it comes from something inside them. I'd also say it's not like we can't do precision strikes. It's not like we can't do bold things. During World War II, this country was very bold, very aggressive, scaled up really quickly. During COVID, you know, for the longest time, Matt, you were not able to order beer online because it would turn you into a raving, reefer madness, man. Like what would happen in your home if you could order a beer online? Every reason would be given why that couldn't happen. And all of a sudden, in the span of a couple of weeks, we're like, COVID, all right, we're changing that rule. Thank you for your
Yeah.
opinion. That's happening. As far as I know, no societal breakdown has occurred because you can buy some, collective arts beer or something like that from online from a Shopify store right now. We can do it. We just sort of forget sometimes that we can do that. And there's one last part. When you don't care as much about people yelling at you, and you're more willing to be like, yeah, well, okay, some people are going to get upset. You're willing to make some changes. If you want to set that everyone has to feel good about every change all the time, that's going to be very difficult to make change happen. By the way, all that's fine if the world isn't changing. But we're now in this world where like, hey man, it's on fire. Things are changing very fast. And
Yeah.
so as a country, we're just going to have to buck up. And I said it yesterday, I feel this is part of our culture too. We just need to remember it. It's the giver culture, right? Like if you're ever with a bunch of Canadians and like you're up north and like a car's stuck in a thing, or like about to go down a hill, you're like, I don't know, give it, let's go. We should be doing that a lot more and remembering that's who we are as well. We're not a timid country. We explored a continent, half a continent here. We built railways, we opened prairies, we built mines, we built great businesses. We shouldn't be ashamed of that. We should be very proud of that and take that on and say that that's who we are as well.
Something you said, I think, is bang on, where you talked a little bit about they had the go up north, the giver attitude. Yeah, I've helped get boats unstuck. Like, yeah, you're absolutely right. What's really interesting to me is this big picture notion that you were talking a minute ago about stability. Canada's a country that is biased towards stability. And in stable times, that's either an advantage or at the very least, it's not a hindrance. In unstable times, being biased towards a stability can be fatal because it makes us very slow to respond. I have I have one more big question for you, and then I've got a couple of smaller ones, and I think that probably is going to suit your schedule because I think you got to go skiing. You got some kids who are waiting on you.
Right. That's the number one job at the
Yeah,
beginning. I forgot to mention 4 kids, got
yeah.
to take care of them.
Yeah, it's amazing you have the energy for anything. I have 2 kids and I can barely get out of bed. So you mentioned a few minutes ago that a lot of the Build Canada guys, and you're a volunteer there. You're not a spokesperson for the organization, but you're the one who I knew through our mutual buddy. So you got the email. Um, you had said it started out with a lot of tech guys, and that you've been broadening out where you've got oil and gas, housing, healthcare, other guys coming into the mix now. I want to ask you a question about tech.
Sure.
And I want to ask you a question in a way that is not alarmist or pejorative. I'm literally just asking this question neutrally. Ever since President Donald Trump, of the United States, has been sworn in, big tech has been a focus of a lot of criticism. And there was a photo from Inauguration Day of Mr. Trump surrounded by a group of guys who are being called the tech bros. And Canadian executives, a Shopify executive, has been attacked in the media for basically saying tariff wars are stupid. We should not retaliate. We should go on different strategy. I I have my own opinion on this, but I want to actually hear it from you. You're a guy who is in tech. Do you think tech as an industry has a political bias? Is it biased right or left? I have my opinion, but I actually want to get yours here. When you hear people saying, "Oh, the tech bros are in the bag for Trump," or the tech bros are anti-progressive, what's your response to that? Like in your experience in tech, what is the politics of tech?
Uh, okay. Yeah. So it's a good question and certainly something that people are thinking about. Um, I I have a few responses. So what is the politics? I think it's the politics of society. Actually, I think if you look at the data of like employment and voting patterns in California and Silicon Valley, it's probably more leftward leaning than that narrative would have it all. So if you're generally talking about the technology industry, and then also I think it's fair to call out that like what being left and right has changed a lot, right? I was having this debate with a friend recently, and I reminded them that, like, the ACLU defended Nazis marching through Skokie, Illinois. If you ever watch the Blues Brothers, they say, "I hate the Illinois Nazis." That's what they're talking about. And the ACLU was like the most progressive organization you could imagine, but they were like, "No, no, free speech means you can march around with a swastika." Now, whether that's right or wrong, I'm just making it as a point that, like, it is true that this definition, which is very simplistic and binomial by nature, it's changed. Okay. So I think, and the reason I get to that is because I do think if I were going to generalize, I'd say most of the people I know in technology are pretty what you would call classically liberal and or progressive in attitudes towards sexuality, gender, rights like that. I think they're pretty open people, is what I would generally say. At the same time, probably yes. It's certainly in the folks who are the entrepreneurs, but not just a belief in free markets, a belief in using new tools, and a disdain for um, rules, especially what are seen as capricious rules that don't make sense, right? Like there's a desire, and then also candidly, probably it's like a hacker ethos, which is like, how do I get around? How do I figure this out? So I just think it's impossible, at least for me, to tell you I know any one thing. Like I know super progressive billionaire tech people and super right wing progressive tech people, but it is it's just a very simplistic view to sort of. I'm not saying you are. I know you're channeling that question, but I just wish people would understand. The second is like, I think tech, yes, there is a industry of it is a massive industry. It's humongous. I mean, it's millions of people, right? And it also swings everywhere from like, an enterprise software company in Alabama, right? Making specialized software for like waste management all the way to like, some 3D rendering art company in San Francisco that's about like progressive expression. Like, I mean, there's a huge variety of people because technology just means tools, means new tools. And there's a lot of people working on bringing new tools to the world. So I feel like that can't answer you the question, but I definitely would say probably pro market more than anything. And they work in technology. They do believe that there are tools that can make things better. I think it's a caricature, by the way, big one, a terrible one, that like people in technology think it solves all problems and everything is just like a business. Like, no, governments are governments, right? Like they have to do things that businesses don't have to do. They're different contexts. Like it's but it doesn't mean that they can't learn. I mean, look, I'm reading a book right now called Speaking Truth to Canadians About Their Public Service. It's a riveting book by one of Canada's top public policy experts, Donald Savoy.
I've read it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
page 62, it talks about, you mentioned Shopify. It talks about how Toby Lutke made a mistake. And he said in a memo to everybody and to the street, I made a mistake. I didn't do this right. Therefore, these people are going to have to leave the company and it's my fault. I did this wrong. And he specifically calls out and says, you will never see a deputy minister, a minister in the Canadian government ever say, I started this program. It's not working. I'm going to take the heat for it. And these people are going to go. It doesn't happen ever. And he calls it out as an example of the behavior and style of how you should lead. Now, you tell me, is that something that the government can learn from tech bros? Or is it like there's nothing to learn? We can't, it's all totally different. No, actually, I mean, literally, this is a textbook from like Canadian public policy expert using that person as an example of how we could learn from the private sector. So I think there's lots to be learned both ways. And I think it's a mistake. We're shooting ourselves in the foot, especially given that the problems that we're trying to solve are growth-oriented problems, to not try and engage the best and the brightest. We used to do this, right? You mentioned think tanks. One of the famous ones in Canada is called the C.D. Howe Institute. Well, C.D. Howe was famous because he was a super successful business person who left his job and became
The
what was
minister of
known as
everything.
dollar a year men. They were mostly men. I hope it's not that way anymore. But they, said, I'm going to go help out. It's World War II. We're in crisis. What do we do? How do we help? We saw a bit of this during COVID. It wasn't as well told a story, but some of our best business leaders got together with the CDL and all the provinces to figure out how could we rapidly move out rapid testing across the country and like break down every single barrier that we could. And these business people, they gave their resources, they gave their time. They were like, what can we do to help the country? The explicit condition was that they had to share everything they learned with their competitors. And they all said, no problem, we're going to do that. I don't see why we can't, in times of crisis, get our shit together, get engaged, and start learning from each other, put away the ad hominem, and try and figure out like, hey, is there something that can be gained from engagement?
I told you before I asked the question that I had my own opinion, and I didn't want to share my opinion because I didn't want to influence your answer. But your opinion basically exactly mirrors mine. I know a lot of tech guys, and to the extent that I've got a sense of their personal feelings, I'd say they're center left leaning on average. Not all of them, there's definitely exceptions. But what they are biased towards is action and solutions. And that can cause them to act in ways that look very conservative. They can be disruptive. They can bypass governments and bureaucracies. They can piss people off. They can break things as they're going to fix stuff. I happen to like that, but I know it pisses some people off. A related question to this before I move on to my two short closing questions. You said you'd been getting a lot of hate mail. I'm used to that. I've been doing this job almost 20 years. Like, one of the things I've had to accept about my job is that I will never write a column that will be so non-controversial that there will not be at least one person who hates my guts for having written it and will email me. It's a weird part of the job, but it happens 100% of the time. It's like Matt Gurney on hockey, Canada's game, and then someone goes, "You monster." It's a very weird thing. You've mentioned getting a lot of opprobrium is the word you used. What are you hearing? Like, I'm just wondering. I think what you guys are doing is great. I don't think all of it's going to work, and I don't know if anyone in government's going to listen to you, but I think it's a good idea. What are you hearing on the negative front?
Well, first of all, I should start by saying I'm really sorry for sending you all those emails, Matt. I
You
apologize.
know what? Stand by your remarks. Own them.
I didn't know it hurt you so much. I'm sorry. Um, but what are the emails? They're nasty versions of what you just asked in a very nice way. You asshole billionaires First of all, I am not a billionaire. Would love to be, but not. It's sorry to tell you. But you assholes think you should run our country. You don't know anything about anything. You have no idea. Like, fuck you. And like, just like, okay, you're mad. I get it.
Yeah.
But that's the general theme is like, what gives you the right to have an opinion?
Yeah.
And I think also implicit is this belief that by putting up a website and trying to write detailed, specific, serious policy memos, that we're doing some sort of undemocratic behavior. I'm like, I don't understand. This is someone like in a very nice way was like, they're like, you're doing what Alexander Hamilton did. You're pamphleteering. You're writing Federalist Papers. I'm like, yeah, I know. And we're not lobbying the government. We're putting them on the internet so everyone can see them. And yes, I know they're listening because they're certainly, at least if the journalists who are paying attention, including yourself, are an indication, so are the policymakers. And we've heard they're like, oh, this is interesting. We've even had some of our entrepreneurs get called. The transportation one, the Department of Transport called that entrepreneur and said, these are interesting ideas. Can we talk to you? Bingo. Like, that's great. That's good. That's what it is. But that's not undue influence. That's like doing the work of democracy. That is doing the work. Like, I'm sorry to tell these people, maybe I'm just get mad at them. Like, if you think yelling at people on Reddit is being in a citizen and is being in a democracy, and that's all it is, you're mistaken. Like, you have to get into the ring, and I think what we're doing is exactly that. It's not unfair, it's not undue. And I actually would say one last thing. Sometimes they're mad because they're like, why should we pay attention to you? And my answer is, you don't have to. It's literally an X site and a website. Don't come. And I've gotten the question from a lot of journalists. They're like, "What? Why do you have the right?" I'm like, I'm not trying to be a smartass, but like, we don't have a PR team. We have not put out a press release. We have not emailed anybody and said, "Hey, we're doing this." All of the media coverage has been reporters calling us. So I'm like, yeah, that's how it happens. And like the idea that we're doing something untoward, we're literally responding to people saying, "You have good ideas. We want to talk to you about it." So that's the kind of opprobrium that you get. Obviously, you can tell it's, I'm like, I don't know what to do with it. Everyone who's done this before, I'm not a political person. They're like, who cares? Just ignore it. It's part of the deal. It's exactly what you get. I just find it funny. And I also find it a little sad. I'm like, why don't you write your own memo? It's not that hard. Like, go write something else. Go be a little, just a step beyond yelling on Reddit would be really great for our country if you cared a lot.
Do what I've been doing for as long as I've been doing it, and your hairline will look a lot more like mine because, like, everything I put out there is some version of, there's always the nice feedback. Hey, really good column. Hey, well written, Matt. Oh, interesting thought. Oh, I disagree, but it was worth reading about. And then there's the fuck you, you monster brigade. And there is nothing I can write that is non-contentious enough to avoid at least one person absolutely hating my guts for it. So welcome to my world. All right. Go ahead.
No, no, it's funny because like, look, my instinct, I am naive this way, or maybe just endlessly positive, relentlessly positive. I want to engage people. I'm like, okay, you hate me, but let's have a talk about it. Why is it you hate me? Like, what is it that you think this idea is so bad about? And everyone who's smarter says like, please don't do that. It's just gonna end in tears. You're never gonna work well. But I have like hope springs eternal. I'm like, no, but that's kind of this project. It is like, no, reasoned discussion, well thought out arguments should get the airtime and people should consider it. It is a bit idealistic. That's okay. Idealism is not bad.
You sweet summer child. All right, two fast questions, then we'll get you off to the slopes. And by the way, maybe you'd be a billionaire if you weren't taking 4 kids skiing on a regular
Yeah,
basis.
yeah, yeah.
That could be part of it. You had mentioned some of the papers you guys have already done. You've already mentioned some of the ones that are coming up here, but we've just done that in a bit of a scattershot way where they keep popping up in other parts of the conversation. Can you take a minute and kind of tell me what you guys have published so far and what do you know is coming out soon?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So let me let's talk about a few. I did have some cheat sheets here, so I apologize if my eyes are dotting on the screen. I'm
Nope,
just
not at all.
kind of trying to keep it there.
My daughter's been texting me the whole time, and I've been glancing at my phone to go,
Oh,
stop, stop,
cool.
stop, stop.
Cool.
So,
They're very relentless. When they
uh-huh.
attack, just keep repeating the same text. Okay, cool. So like I said, we put out a bunch of memos so far, and just in terms of like the process, we've got a backlog of entrepreneurs who are like, "Hey, I have this idea. Will you help me?" We have a limited capacity. We try and filter them through the things I mentioned before. Are they growth oriented? Are they like focused? Are they subtractive? Are they bold? And then we try and start putting them out and see if they're topical. So here's what we've done so far. So one that just came out, I think 2 days ago, from Ben Allery. Uh, he's the guy I taught that class with at U of T Law. He's one of the top tax professors in the country, but also founder of a company called Blue Jay Legal, which is an AI tax company. So his observation is we should do what Estonia did. So Estonia 20 years ago saw the digital revolution coming and said, we are going to be a digital first country. They got a lot of new thinking and new approaches, and it's paid significant dividends in terms of companies, but also the efficiency of the government. His approach and his idea is that we should become an AI first country, right? And instead of like endless commissions and hand wringing about like justice and equity and fairness and bias, which are real issues, but the argument is that the way you figure those out especially in a hyper competitive world, is you just start building.
Mhm.
And here we have a situation where we have a very large bloated public service, which is providing services that people feel are terrible. Like less than 14% of people are happy with the service they get from the federal government. And we have a domestic industry. We started AI. Why don't we start by making ourselves an AI government? Let's look where we can use AI technology to rapidly improve service, whether it's passport processing, security reviews, zoning evaluation. Like, let's see what we can do really quickly. Keep humans involved, of course, but how can we rapidly do that? How can we do that by being a customer rather than giving grants to companies? We become a customer of those companies, and we build a domestic industry, because I promise you 100% certainty as an investor in a lot of early stage technologies, every government at some point is going to become significantly AI driven. And I'm talking the next 5 to 7 years. So why don't we get there first instead of worrying about it, build an industry, make our government more efficient, and improve our services, and then we go sell that to the rest of the world, right? That to me is an idea, because if we don't, what we're going to do is literally wait, have extra costs, bad service, and at some point we'll decide after a huge selection process to buy Microsoft's version of e-government, and we'll just pay someone else for that. Okay, that's idea one, make Canadian government services AI first. I mentioned the other one, Mike Serbinis's one, unlock our health records and save Canadian lives, right? Just your medical history should be with you everywhere. You go into an emergency room, they should know everything about you. You have a referral to a specialist, they still know all the detail they know. If you're on a ski trip on another part of the country, you have to go to the hospital, they're going to know what allergies you have. We should get rid of all the fax machines and the inefficiency that exists in our healthcare system. And this is not bold because of the idea. People have talked about this for a very long time. What's bold is Mike is saying, enough already. Just shit or get off the pot. Let's do it. Like, we know what the standard is. What's holding it up is just a lot of different interests and a lot of that Canadian, well, let's study it more. And he's like, let's just do it. We'll learn. Martin Basiri, who ran a couple of immigration software companies. And basically his point is that we should have a talent first immigration strategy. He said, like, if you're a company, you compete for talent, you try to find the best, most innovative people. We should compete as a country for immigrants like that. We need great people. We need immigrants. We need them to be highly educated. We need them to be highly effective at onboarding. We need them to be, I would say, values oriented with the culture that grows here. And I think we have swung the pendulum so far, at least he does, sorry, not me. I agree with him though. We swung the pendulum so far on kind of humanitarian based immigration, even if there are reasons, Ukraine war, whatever war, that we have lost sight of that. And that instead of viewing our immigration like we view the Bank of Canada, like the interest rate can be used for lots of things, but we view it as the stable thing that's meant to keep inflation down and unemployment at a certain level. He's like, we should view immigration that way. It shouldn't be all ministerial political diktat. It should be, how do we help grow the economy? Third one, transportation. There's a lot of new technology coming on about transportation. Just last week, the first commercial supersonic flight went with no sonic boom, by the way, or much reduced sonic boom. There's going to be all sorts of this coming. Robots, robot couriers, drones. We can't even get scooters in the city of Toronto. Okay. And the CEO who points this out is the CEO of Bird. So, he understands this deeply. You can view this whatever way you want. I think it's like he knows exactly what he's talking about. And his point, he actually had worked on a previous telco company. He said, look, if we had governed cellular communication, mobile communication, like we do transportation, we would never have a cell phone network in the country. Because what would have happened is you would have got to go to every single town and debate with them about, well, this is how high a tower should be. This is the frequency that this technology is used. This is why it's not bad for cancer research. And I know that someone down at the school has a paper and makes a presentation, but like, no, you just wouldn't have had it. You would literally have cities that say, no, we have no cell phone towers, or they're not compatible. The federal government wisely said, no, no, no. One standard across the country for cell phones. There's something called the 14.9 rule. If you have a tower below 14.9 meters, you can put it up and the city can't stop you. I mean, there's some restrictions, but his point is we need to do that for, we should make everybody who's building transport technology build it here. And by the way, on that point, sometimes people are like, to your Doge question, they're like, are you trying to be like Canada's Elon Musk? And my answer to that is Canada already has an Elon Musk. He went to school here. He worked on a farm here. He worked at Scotiabank. The question is, why did he leave and start two of the biggest transportation companies in the world not here, right? Like that should be the question about Elon Musk. Why do we not have a Tesla in the Ottawa-Waterloo corridor? Why does SpaceX not a partnership with the Canadian Space Agency, right? Okay, let's keep going down. One that I love from Mike Litt, who's been a great leader of the startup community in Waterloo. And his is titled "A Great Nation Celebrates Its Achievements and Its Builders, and So Should Canada." And his point is look, 34% of Canadians, only 34% are very proud of the country. I think I mentioned to you, more than 40% of young Canadians, 18 to 34, would vote for union with the United States. I mean, less than 14% are happy where we are. It is not a good vibe out there. And one of his points is that all of these specific policies matter, but the bully pulpit matters too. The narrative matters. And I think, while there has been lip service and press conferences, it would be fair to say that the dominant prioritized choice of what the story of Canada has not been, we are a nation of builders. We are a nation of people who opened the Hudson's Bay Company. By the way, a partnership with Indigenous people. We are a nation of people who, created massive mines, massive hydro projects, who, build companies like Canada Goose or Lululemon or Mike's Hard Lemonade. These are global brands. They're Canadians. And so his point is, first, we need to tell that and make that part of all the money that we're spending on heritage, right? It has not been the priority. We've prioritized other stories. Those are good. But if the mindset of our young people is that I am literally not a good Canadian if I want to go build a company, which I don't think is far off from where we're telling people, if you aggregate it up, that, well, maybe are you really contributing to society? Is that like a great Canadian thing to do? That's a problem. We need people to want to build. And I'm not talking tech companies. I'm talking about landscape companies and a little textile factory. They need to get going and open a retail store. So he suggests first that we have to put that in a narrative. And second, he has a mechanism. He says, instead of funding grants where we're funding people and taking applications, he's like, why don't we just reward people who put out great content? That's how the internet works. If you put out, here's the framework. If you put out essentially, let's call it a modern heritage minute that gets 1 million views, let's just pay you out for that thing, right? Let's let people who, in the old days when everyone didn't have a home studio and a video, we'd have to have this mindset. Well, we have to fund creators and their studios. And his point is, we don't. Have you not noticed? They're producing tons of content all over the show. Why don't we reward them for great Canadian content that tells great stories, and think about different mechanisms for changing the narrative inside the country? I kind of like what he's proposing. So those are some of the ideas, and there's more to come. There's one on interprovincial trade that just came out. Actually, you asked about what's a precision strike, and I love the way this project's unfolding. So Wayne Poman put that out. Wayne is the chief revenue officer of a firm. He, it's funny, back to the what do these tech bros know? Well, he happened to do a PhD in international trade, so he knows a little bit about that. And he wrote on interprovincial trade about what the barriers were. And he pointed out, I think his is called Good Here, Good Anywhere, that, for all the pontificating that's happening right now, we could immediately fix a lot of this interprovincial trade barrier, which is 15 to 20 points of GDP, or equivalent to a tariff of 15 to 20%, by simply adopting a universal passport.
Yeah.
Right? Basically, we can sort out the details of national regulatory bodies. All that work can get done. How do we synchronize? How do we do it? But for today, in an emergency, it's an economic COVID, we could just say, listen, if you're licensed in Ottawa, you're licensed in Quebec, you are licensed.
You can work in Ontario. You can work in New Brunswick.
If your truck can drive in Nova Scotia, you can drive it in Alberta. That's it, period. We could do that tomorrow if the premiers got together, the Council Federation said, that's it, we're making it happen. They have not, but they need to. So those are some of the ones that we've put out. There'll be more. Like I'm pretty excited. The thing that I was saying that's happening that's really neat is that people are paying attention to these entrepreneurs. The reason I heard Wayne's interview is because he was on the CBC. They wanted to talk to him about it. And I hope that happens more. I think these are people who have reasons, ideas. They've tried to put them down as best they can. There's nothing sneaky or nefarious about it. But I do think we as a country would be better off if we listen to our builders, incorporate their ideas, not just their ideas, but we incorporate their ideas so we get back on track to that 4%, 5% growth rate as a country.
Last question for you, and it's an easy one. For anyone who's curious about this or anyone who might want to contribute, where do they go?
Sure. buildcanada.com. Just go to the website. There's also Build Canada on X, on TikTok, on Instagram. They can go there. They can sign up. We will send newsletters, send them all the papers as they come. We've literally had hundreds of people volunteer already. So we're trying to figure out what to do. Like, I don't want to overplay this. Like, we had a great talk, but it's literally a bunch of volunteers in the Slack room writing papers and then putting them on the internet. So we're trying to figure out how do we take this energy. I mean, it's been so awesome, Matt. The number of people who've reached out and they're like, I have the same line. I have not felt optimistic about Canada in a long time. This made me feel good. I'm glad to see someone's trying something positive. Some variant on that. And so, yeah, if you feel that way, go to the website. We're going to try and figure out ways of amplifying this beyond policy papers at some point.
You know what? I wish you guys every success. Not everything you're going to propose is going to make sense, but thank God people are proposing it because this country needs a kick in the butt. We need to get knocked out of our same old, same old. Big changes are coming on every front, and we need to start adapting, adapt or die. So here it comes, and let's get to work on this. Daniel Debow, volunteer at Build Canada, buildcanada.com. Thanks, man. Really appreciate your time. Get out there, hit the slopes.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I love your writing. Take care, man.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to On the Line. That was my conversation with Daniel Debow, a volunteer at Build Canada. You can check them out at buildcanada.com. Many thanks to you for listening. Do all the usual great things, guys. Like, subscribe, share, mash those buttons. Help us build the algorithm that will help us support On the Line. And as always, visit us at our website, readtheline.ca. We'll be back in a week, so stay tuned. This has been another episode of On the Line.